What is up? I'm Danielle.
And I'm Gina.
And this week we are talking with Katie Bogenschutz, an attorney who is currently practicing in criminal defense. Katie, say hi.
Hi.
Today is a bit of a heavy topic, so consider this a trigger warning. We will be tackling victim advocacy, abuse, and rape culture. So without further ado, welcome to The Unwed Bride. This is The Unwed Bride, where we challenge culture and empower people.
As women who have experienced some traumatic situations in life, we want to bring awareness to the pain, shame, the process, and ultimately the hope and healing that comes from abuse and rape culture.
Yeah, The Unwed Bride is a show where we want to bring light to situations that might be holding us back, challenge any learned behaviors and beliefs, and empower you to make any necessary changes in order to live your life to the fullest. Katie, you know that you have a very special place in my heart. I absolutely love what you do and your heart behind it. It's an honor to have you on the show today. And for the listener, Katie was actually my attorney. Well, she was the prosecutor in representing the state of Florida in a case that you will hear about in a little bit. But Katie, it really is an honor to have you on the show today.
I'm really happy to be here. And as I told you previously, when I talked to you and you contacted me about this, I was like, it sounds so, it's really rude for me to say something like, wow, you sound so healthy. Because it's like, I wouldn't expect you to be, but I mean, you were extremely healthy when I met you. Emotionally healthy, and for you to be able to go through what you went through, even your detective told me, he was like, yeah, this girl's insane. She's 22. She didn't tell her parents. She called her pastor, and then she called me, and I'm like, do you want to call your parents? And she's like, no, I got it.
I am not surprised. Oh my
God. It was like big girl pants, handling it. Wow. I can do this.
Yeah. And whether that was trauma brain or whether that was my main reason behind it was I didn't want that to be something I told my parents over the phone, and I just hadn't seen them yet. So I wasn't like, I'm not telling my parents, like, we'll get to that in a second, but yes. I'm really glad you're here.
I'm really glad to be here, and I'm so happy to be involved in this, and I loved your first episode.
Love it.
So cool. Katie, for our guests who might not know you, please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So I'm from South Florida originally. I went to college in Virginia, which is how I know about Liberty University, which is where Danielle went. And that kind of plays in a little bit later. And then I went back to Fort Lauderdale for law school, graduated in 2009, went to the state attorney's office. And about 3.5 or 4 years in, I went to the sex crimes and child abuse unit. And I had a deal with the state attorney that if I couldn't handle it, he was going to remove me. And he would do that fast if I needed him to. And I think I cried every single day the first 2 weeks in that unit with my door closed like an adult, obviously,
Yes. Yeah.
But I mean, it was horrible. And then I started getting good at it, and I really enjoyed it. And I still have victims, obviously, that keep in contact with me. And it's great. And then I moved over to the gun unit, which is where I was during Parkland, which was a whole thing. I wasn't really involved in that case, but it was a whole thing. Like, I didn't try another case for months because they didn't want to pick a gun jury. Right, in Broward County, they'd convict their own moms, right?
Right.
And then I moved up here. My fiance bought a house, so I pretty much had to move up here. And I went back to the state attorney's office here. I did sex crimes there for about 3 years. Huh?
Yeah, Tallahassee. Up here is Tallahassee.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Up here is Tallahassee. It's the real South. I have to tell people up here that I'm from South Florida and just assume if I'm insulting you, I don't mean it. And then I went into private practice about 11 months ago. I'm losing track of time. And I've been in private criminal defense since then.
Wow.
So I've been a lawyer for about 13 years now.
What a history.
Yeah. So you've been on all sides, really, of the law, from prosecuting, victim advocacy to criminal defense. Like, what made you want to be a lawyer? And then how did you decide, like, where you kind of wanted to be? Or was that like a trial and error, no pun intended, journey?
So both my parents are lawyers. My mom was actually pregnant with me when she was a prosecutor. And she, she was like, well, if I had to be pregnant, I wanted to get something out of it. So she scheduled all of her trials for when she looked really pregnant, and she was undefeated. And I was like, most people would say you got a baby out of it.
It was spoken over you in utero, Katie.
Yeah, it was. Wow. So and I knew I was going to be a prosecutor at law school because you learn how to try cases there. And for anybody who, doesn't care about making a lot of money and wants to have a really good time, prosecuting DUIs is amazing because it's all on video now and it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Wow. So that's kind of what I cut my teeth on. And then I went up to attempted murders and, moved on. I had an attempted murder with a samurai sword where somebody tried to chop somebody else's head off.
Like with a samurai sword.
Yeah, it was on the wall as decoration.
I was going to say, I didn't know those really actually existed, but okay. Yeah.
My cousin teaches like an honors English class, and she'll have me on to talk to her kids. And I'm like, look, if you ever see a samurai sword on the wall as decoration, and everyone around you is smoking crack, leave. And they're like, you would think you wouldn't have to say that to somebody. And I was like, oh, trust me, somebody needed to hear it.
Wow.
Yeah. All of the disclaimers on anything are there for a reason. Like McDonald's, this coffee is hot because they got sued. Like any disclaimer is there for a reason.
Yeah. I am learning really quickly, Katie, I love your humor. And I am learning that it is probably how you operate with sanity with everything that you encounter.
It's a defense mechanism, 100%. Yeah.
Or we'll just say it. Yeah.
That's why she's on the episode.
I love it so much. So good. So real. So real.
So much similarity. I love it.
Yeah.
So for you guys listening, me and Katie obviously have a very special relationship. She was around and she was, again, the prosecutor appointed to the state of Florida in my case, in what had happened to me. So we're just going to dive right in. So in 2013, I was 22 because it wasn't my birthday yet, but I was the victim of a sexual assault, of a rape. And it was at a Massage Envy. And so that's a big argument for, oh, well, what were you wearing? It's like, well, nothing, because I was getting a massage. So we just talked about purity culture last episode. So that's a good tie-in because it is not your fault regardless of what you are wearing. So it happened around like 5:00 at night. I immediately went out. I actually knew the girl that was at the front desk because we went to high school together. And she, we were shooting the shit before the appointment and hey, how's it going? So good to see you. What are you up to? Then after the appointment, I was physically I was just shut down. Okay, do I owe anything? I'm leaving. And so then I get in my car. I don't know what just happened. And I had been thinking through these people that, okay, am I going to tell somebody? If I am, who is it going to be? All these thoughts that are running through your mind. And my youth, he's a pastor that I'd worked with, and he had actually texted me in that moment. And he was like, yo, dude, you ready for the game tonight? Because the Heat were in the playoffs. And that was, I'm a sport management major. I love my sports. So, and I was like, yeah, I think I need to talk to you about something. And so then he's like, what's up? And I was like, it's not something to text about. So then he called me and I briefly tell him, I was like, I think I was just raped. And he immediately stopped and prayed on the phone. Then when he stopped praying, he's like, you have to tell somebody, you have to go to the cops. So I didn't immediately. I went home, cried for 2 hours, read my Bible, and then drove myself down to the police station, waited 45 minutes for somebody to show up because by that time the station was closed. And so then 45-minute statement with the first guy. Then he's like, okay, well, we need SVU here. So then I had to wait longer for Detective Mitter to get there. Then another like 45-minute hour recorded statement with him. And then he's like, all right, well, like we need to go like get a rape kit done. So then we drove down to the sexual assault treatment center down in Fort Lauderdale, had to wait an hour for the nurse to get there. Silver lining, I caught the game in the waiting room. And so then like she finally gets there, we do the rape kit. Then I go back out into the waiting room, like finish watching the game while she processes it. Then we drive home. I get home probably like 2 a.m. and I'm living with my parents at the time. And so then the next day they wanted me to come back to do a recorded phone call with the guy because he slipped his business card in my purse thinking that it's exactly what I wanted. So I had his phone number, had his name, had everything, go down to the police station the next morning, do a recorded phone call, longest 12-minute phone call of my life because you have to be so detailed. Like you can't just say, why did you do that to me? You have to explain what he did so that it can be evidence. And so that recorded phone call apparently was a gold mine. It was like he was going through every excuse in his head of why he did that and saying why that wasn't true. Like I literally remember him saying like, yeah, like I'm not on drugs, so I don't know why I did that. And it's like, it was weird and confusing. But anyway, so then Detective Mitter like walks me out and he was like, that was a slam dunk. Like, I'm so proud of you. That was so good. And I was like, yeah, I watch a lot of Law and Order SVU, so I kind of knew what to expect. And he was like, well, if that's a silver lining, then I guess there it is.
Wow.
And then I, again, had still not seen my parents. I went to dinner with a girl that I mentored that night. Then on the way home, I got a phone call that they had arrested him. And then I get home. Then I tell my parents, hey, I think we need to talk. Go sit down with my parents. My mom immediately starts sobbing before I even tell her. But she, like mother's intuition, she knew something was wrong. And so I tell them, and man, my dad, he is such a man of God. I love him. He's like, I always wondered if something like this happened, if I would want to murder him or if I'd be able to forgive him. And in what world does a man protecting his daughter, does forgiveness even cross his mind? Right. Like, that is so unheard of. Dad, I love you so much. I hope you're not listening to this episode to relive all of this, but if you are, I love you dearly. And mom too. So then I told them, we prayed, like we cried together. And that was in June of 2013. Court didn't happen until October 2014. So that is then when I met Katie, and like our personalities, we obviously get along pretty well. we're a little similar. And so that's how I know Katie. She is a freaking boss and prosecuted the crap out of him, and with no priors that were even charged against him or anything. It was a 2-day trial, it ended up being, and he was convicted and he was sentenced to 15 years for both counts served congruently. So he got just a step below maximum with no priors. And it was, God's hand was all over that trial. It was insane. And I'll come back to that in a few. But so I understand the whole rape culture, victim advocacy. Like I understand a lot of, because I lived it. So if you are listening to this and that's your story, like I hear you, I get you. And I'm so sorry that happened to you, but like we are here to talk about it and bring some light to what can be done better as a culture, and how to deal with it in that situation. And if you know somebody, if a loved one has been through that, how to support that as well. But you actually have some experience with this too, because Katie will know this better. But when I was going through, it was, the stats were 1 in 4 women have been sexually assaulted and 1 in 6 men have been sexually assaulted. Katie, is that still accurate? Or
I mean, I think that's low, based on, you know, how many people, when I would tell people what unit I was in, it was amazing. Even like in a bar, like, they would like pull me aside and quietly begin to talk to me about something that they had questions about. And I was just like, yeah, I would venture that, you know, attempted versus completed. I mean, I think it's probably about 50% for women.
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all. That makes
men,
so much
it's more
sense.
difficult because you never know what they're telling you and what you know, they're keeping to themselves.
Yeah, exactly. Their guards are way more up than ours are. Not that we're not guarded, but men definitely have a harder time talking about that.
Well, I'm amazed just hearing your story for maybe the second or third time and more thoroughly, the ability, and kind of like what people have been saying about the silver lining, your ability to function in that moment. Like, clearly your brain was in trauma brain, but also it seems the grace of God was on you to just take the next step that was needed. And I think something that I've learned in my story, which I will share a little bit, it'll be my first time really publicly putting it out there, that he's the ultimate judge. It's up to him. And my job, your job, is to present your truth. And so I find comfort in that for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
But my story is a little bit more on being impacted in a different way. So I was married. You guys have heard from the previous episodes that I was married for 6.5 years, but that marriage ended when my now ex-husband, I found out that he had assaulted someone in the setting in the business that we sort of owned.
Right.
That was, he kind of had a story for that. Oh no, that didn't actually happen. At this point, we were still married. Things weren't adding up for me. Long story short, he ended up being charged. I ended up doing some digging. I ended up doing some digging about what was really going on here, because there were so many red flags and things were not adding up. And in my digging in this business that we owned, I found out that he had assaulted women. Multiple women. Yeah. And in my mind at that time, I couldn't compute that. That did not make sense. I did not have personal anything that was violent for me with my then husband. So what I did is wore a face to him at home, right? And then met with the victims that said he was had allegedly raped these women. So I contacted them and said, can we meet for coffee? And wore the best poker face that I could, sat across from said victim. And I knew in that moment with that first victim, sitting there and hearing her story, that this in fact happened. And it was this shock, this trauma brain. So my husband of however many years had allegedly raped this woman, hearing her story and asking her at the end, you know, did you go forward? Why or why not? Hearing her talk about that, and me as still a wife saying, well, if this happened, you should go forward. Just like wild to think about that. And then I still was wrapping my head around, this can't be true. This can't be the life of this husband of mine, and the home life be this life of this father and husband of mine. I couldn't reconcile it. So I met with the second victim, also at a coffee shop. And she shared her story, and she was in process of turning him in. And so what then ensued was me finding out that he had told people that we were in an open marriage, which we were not. That was news to me. And when I had proof and evidence and went to him, he finally worked through a process of disclosure and disclosed to me an 8-page letter of numerous women that he had had any type of sexual encounter with. And I dealt with a lot of shame and guilt of like, how could I not see this? How could I not know that fishing trips with this guy were actually something completely different? So he really had this other life and different narratives with these women about who he was and where he was from and what life was like. So this was my real throw into the water of, to be honest, rape culture.
Yeah.
And how it impacted me on the other side,
right,
if that makes sense. So just this power of perverse sexuality and how it impacted me and my children and how it was so disguised. So, I mean, I can't believe that this person who I was so in life with and committed and honorable, and I wasn't perfect by any means, but I was for sure faithful, how he was living these different lives. So he was, obviously I asked him to leave our home, and I asked him to do numerous things. I asked him to go to rehab. I asked him to do so much. I had kind of this list. And at that point, my trauma brain was still like wanting to fight for this marriage because I thought that he had an addiction and that he had these issues. This was before I met with his therapist, which I had alluded to in episode 1.
Yeah.
But to speed this up, long story short, I was also still doing my own detective work and my own digging, and was finding money being cash apped to different women. I was finding other things still going on and still happening, despite the face that I was seeing of, I want to fight for the kids and you. So there was really no action and no follow through. The media, Katie, I don't know, the media got a hold of the story. It was in the big newspapers. And that was really hard. Disclosed the block that the kids and I lived on that he wasn't even living on. He was arrested, put in jail, and out on bail, and now has been awaiting a trial and working with things. I don't know. So it's been this long. That was back in, I want to say that was February, March of 2020, right before the pandemic. And the pandemic has pushed out this trial numerous times. So anyway, I obviously have been contacted many times by different investigators and things, and it's been hard for me to know how to navigate that. But again, I have just felt with my relationship with God that, Gina, I am the ultimate judge. And my prayer is just that, God, you know exactly where he needs to be. You know the path of this. You know what healing looks like for him, for the kids and I. It is me, Mama Henning, and it is me to protecting and taking care of them, yet legally having to abide by the fact that this trial hasn't occurred yet.
Right.
There's these alleged 2 counts of sexual assault that he's been in works for. So I'm awaiting that, and we'll see what happens, but just to kind of be face to face with that in that way has been absolutely life altering. And I think I'm still working through it. Right. Obviously I ended up divorcing him and, wanting him to find his healing, and then pursuing my own and the grief of my children and walking through. I mean, my daughter even decided, in first grade that her classmates decided they were going to Google their parents. So she came home, I'll never forget it, in May last year, the first grader, with the mugshot and the article that she could fully read everything. So this is just the impact that this has had on us as a whole, and helping my daughter, a 6-year-old, now 7-year-old, walking through that reality has been definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my story, and Katie awaiting the next step.
And I always wondered, when I was obviously not in Danielle's situation, but in situations where someone was married and had kids and stuff like that, we always kind of sat together at lunch and were like, if you were a fly on the wall in their house. And there were a lot of people and a lot of parents of perpetrators. I can think of one set of parents in particular, who were trying to figure out where I lived to, try to talk to me about the case. Sure. And I'm like, right, I'm sure you'll be talking a lot.
Right.
And they were on jail calls, like trying to figure out where I lived. And like, thankfully I rented, but, It's amazing to think about the fallout from these things.
Yeah.
And we always wondered, like, what do you need to tell yourself as the wife of a guy like this in order to stay
Right.
with him?
Right.
You know,
Right.
and then we kind of just sat down and, like, we're almost having our own group therapy session as prosecutors. Like, you know, isn't it easier for you to say, well, he's telling the truth and everybody else is lying, and I don't need to uproot my entire life?
Exactly.
And so
Katie,
kudos to you for, you know, doing the...
Well, I have to say, I can 100% align and understand how a woman would say, oh, this is just easier. At least I have someone who, well, when he is home, he does help put the kids to bed. Like, at least you have what the world thinks you have. I mean, not the other life sort of scenario, but our life was very much what it looked like. Perfect. The perfect home. You got your dream house. You got your 2.5 children, your picket fence. Like, you had it all. So why not just like, okay, well, please stop doing that. Like, I mean, my closest friends, there were 2 people who walked through the day in and the day out with this. Otherwise, I kept it quiet because, man, and so much shame and guilt that I was carrying. Like, how did you not see that? But they, from the outside looking in and knowing him, their words are, they just wanted to shake me, to be like, do you realize what he did? You know, but I only see, my brain wants to protect me. My brain wants to protect me and my children and kind of keep this great image up, because it is going to be a cost to give that up, right? Mm-hmm. And now, obviously, years later, the cost is so much more worth it. There's so much more freedom. But I can understand why someone would say, well, this sucks, but I'm just going to push through it. And like, I wish that I was more valued by my husband, but I guess I'm not going to be, but at least I'll have help around the house or whatever it may be.
Yeah. Living in the mediocre.
Yeah, for sure. It's easier.
Yes.
I think it's crazy that, like, literally day one of us meeting, and if this isn't a testament to God orchestrating every little detail, I don't know what is, but day one of meeting you, we were serving at church.
Yeah.
We were holding the doors open, the front door, and like service had started. So there weren't many people coming in. So we were just kind of hanging out outside at this point. But I don't even know why I told you my story. I told you how my case was in the media. Mm-hmm. Plenty of news channels had it, and even though my face was blurred, like, even though like they were protecting me as a victim, when it aired, I still got texts of like, I know your voice. Like, mm-hmm. Oh, I can't believe that happened. I'm so sorry. Like, are you okay? All these things. So like, even though my identity was protected.
I think that they even had a shot of you walking up to the stand where they didn't blur your face. And I flipped out and texted the people from Channel 7, was like, take it down.
It was Channel 7, yeah.
Yeah, it was Channel 7. I know it was Channel 7. They like, I was like, I don't know, it's 15 seconds in, and they were like, and pulled it down real quick.
Yeah. And like, I mean, you see my hair, like you see my rings that I wear, like you see, and especially that combined with like my necklaces, my voice, like people who know me know that that's me. And so I'm telling this to you on day one of our friendship. And I remember you being like, you have no idea how bad I needed to hear that, number one, but also number two, of like how much I can relate to that. Yeah. Like it still blows me, because that was day one of like.
For sure. I remember, so I'm a therapist. At the time that I was meeting with these victims, I had worked with heavy trauma, mostly with kids, older women, and sexual trauma was something that I worked from, with the brain and mental health and all that. And I just remember being across from these women and having this inner conflict of like, you're simultaneously like this, I can't believe what happened, but I have so much empathy and sympathy for you. Yet, what? This was my husband? Like, just this difficulty trying to process that. And very quickly after everything was in the media in Minnesota, where I was originally from, my kids and I moved. So the media, I think it was March, we moved in June, July, met Danielle pretty quickly after that. And my story was hidden. I could be anonymous here.
Yeah.
I could be, and we needed that. The kids and I needed a cocoon season. And that was what I was pursuing partly as well for numerous reasons. And having the safety with you, which must have been only of God, at those church doors that day where you said this, I felt God say to me in that moment, You're supposed to walk in friendship with her. She's going to understand.
Yeah.
She is like a victim that you could have sat across from. Like, you know what I'm saying? So it was this wild full circle moment. Like, I needed to be known, but I needed the safety of not necessarily wanting to share my story to the extent that I was not yet ready.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you were that person for me that long ago. Whoa.
Love
full
you
circle.
so much.
Ugh,
So
love
crazy.
you too.
So with some of our history, knowing what we have been through, Katie, what we have our own, but I also want to know from your perspective, especially because it's the unbiased, it's the legal, it's what are some of the biggest issues in rape culture today? Like, what have you seen to be one of or some of like the biggest issues in rape culture today?
So this may sound bad, and I do realize that you have the ability to edit me out. So feel free to do that. But a lot of what I've seen is there's almost been too much of a swing towards Me Too, and there's a backlash there that, there's every little thing that somebody's ever done wrong to a woman, they're punished for. And so it kind of like toughens everyone's shells against it, like where you're just like, yeah, so's everybody, and move on. And that's not the way that it should be. I mean, I remember when the whole Me Too thing started, we were all in sex crimes, and I was just thinking to myself, oh, this is awesome. Of course.
This is gonna be
I was like,
right.
We're never going to lose another case.
Wow.
I am going to be on a streak. And it ended up that, I think, and while I believe all the, ethically, I couldn't prosecute a case that I didn't believe that the guy was guilty on. I think it may have swung too far the other way. And I think that particularly older men look at it and can't wrap their heads around this. They think it's a bunch of screaming women that are, we're all victimized and you all need to pay. And of course, that's not the case. But I think that we working in this field almost need to be cognizant of that, because if you go too far and someone's not ready to do it, they become part of the problem. Yeah. And I'm sure I said that very inarticulately, but I had so many people on my juries who were like, I'm not believing a thing she says. I saw what they did to, X, Y, and Z in the news, and it really wasn't that bad. And, to save your outrage for things that are extremely severe, like both of your cases, and not focus on, and I know it's not cool to say this, but not focus on the little microaggressions out there, because people who are older, and I'm not in that category yet, I'm not 40 yet.
No, you're not.
Yet. But no, people that are in their 50s and 60s and 70s, they're not going to understand that. And we have to share the world with them.
I like that statement. We have to share the world with them. Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, so much is minimized, but then, I mean, there are so many situations where, like, because it's the boy who cried wolf, right? So it's like, there are unfortunately situations where people are dramatic and don't have grounds to make those claims. But it's those people that make the people who it really happened to terrified of coming forward. And like, you're part of the reason why people don't come forward, because they don't feel like they're going to be believed. And I know that that's a major reason why some people don't come forward, because unfortunately, sometimes it is he said, she said kind of thing. And it's really sad. But Katie, one thing that you said during trial that I will never forget. You said rape is the only crime where the victim becomes the accused. And that could not be more true. I want you to elaborate on that.
So, what were you wearing? What did you say? Did you smile at him? Were you drinking? Anybody who has a couple sips of alcohol, they want it. Were you wearing a low cut top? Did you hike up your pants? What happened? What did you do to bring this on you? And I used to tell juries when I was a prosecutor that, that the state of the law, and raise your hand if you can't follow it, because, we need to know. But the state of the law is I can go to any bar. Of course, then I lived in Fort Lauderdale, so I had plenty of bars to choose from in this scenario. But I could go anywhere on A1A, get trashed out of my mind, walk home at 4:00 in the morning, because I think all the bars are still open till 4 a.m. down there, wearing nothing but my socks, and no one has a right to lay a hand on me.
Right.
Except for hopefully the cops who are going to throw a blanket on me and, yank me into a police car and say, ma'am, are you okay? But yeah, that's the state of the law, that you can't bring this upon yourself. And there's, in your case, it was easy. And I mean, I know it wasn't easy for you, but it was easy to say, who the hell goes to Massage Envy to have this happen to her?
Right.
It's like, hey, can you guys all agree that I'm in my workspace right here and I'm wearing the clothes that I work in? Does anyone here think I want to have sex with them? Right. Because if they do, we're having a very big miscommunication in this courtroom.
Yes.
So, I mean, and he was in his workplace. He was a masseuse. They're trained on this stuff. Mm-hmm. They're trained in draping.
That is my biggest bone to pick with Massage Envy. And I will throw you under the bus right now. I do not care. It's okay. They hate me too. Yeah. With the trial, we got info of, their policies and procedures. And never once does it say, call the cops. Never once does it say
isolate her, right? That's the one that was like, isolate her immediately.
Yeah, and go into the room with her and ask her what really happened. And then they fill out a report, send it to corporate, and that's all that happens. There are so many instances where a masseuse can be fired from one Massage Envy franchise and be hired at another one because it is never reported. So if there's one thing you get out of this today, don't ever go to Massage Envy. I will trash their name all I want, because you can literally Google Massage Envy sexual assault and pages upon pages upon pages upon pages will come up, because they do not fire. And okay, this was 8 maybe plus years ago, so I can't talk for their policies now, but back then I do know that they fired the lawyer that put those documents together. So I do know that they have made these changes, but I don't care. That doesn't, you can rewrite a document, but that doesn't mean that change is going to be enforced all throughout every single franchise, because that's quite hard to do. So yeah, I had so many lawyers who, Matt being one of them, Matt Weissing, love him dearly, still talk to him, still keep in touch with him. Brad Edwards, who is a freaking boss. If you saw the Netflix Epstein documentary about Jeff Epstein, I say Jeff as if I know him. Jeffrey Epstein.
My boy Jeff.
What is it called? Filthy Rich, I think.
Yes.
Brad is on the documentary because he's one of the ones that was very involved in that against Prince Andrew and all the people.
Former Broward sex crimes prosecutor too.
Oh yeah. So between Katie, Matt, and Brad, I had one hell of an army behind me. And that is also, we didn't know who Matt and Brad were when we hired. We didn't know. And I mean, I clearly didn't have, I didn't pick you. So God's hand was all over that too. But
yeah, well, I mean, if I had been totally incompetent, let's hope my office would have done something about that. But
yeah, right.
But I never told you this, or at least I don't think I did. And I was like, do I tell her today? So you had left on vacation with your family, and I took the verdict without you there. And I think you were getting on a boat.
I was there that morning.
Yeah.
I was there that morning with you because I wanted to testify. This is for sentencing. So there's conviction and then there's sentencing, 2 different trials. You're talking about sentencing trial where I was there that morning. I saw his mom roll in a wheelchair, and I really wanted to say my piece, but I didn't. So then I really quickly wrote you a note of what I wanted to say. And that's where I think you were talking about.
Oh, no, I'm talking about the verdict. You weren't there for the verdict.
Oh,
you were on vacation I thought you were on vacation with your family.
I was on vacation for the sentencing.
Okay, so then I texted you about the sentencing.
Yeah.
Okay. What were you as I was walking in to get the verdict, the same guys work at the courthouse all the time for the different news stations. So, and I always like to know, what do they think? Because they watch a lot of trials, right? The same way I ask the court reporter what they think. And And he goes, "You're toast." And I went, "Okay." And went in and took the verdict. And it was guilty on everything. And I was sitting in front of him and I was just like, I like remember walking in and going, "Oh, crap."
Yeah.
Wow.
No, I was there. Because it was a 2-day trial. That was actually on Halloween that it was given. And so I remember waiting out in the hallway with my headphones in, worship music on, like just trying to stay there. And when we got word, because it took longer than I expected.
Yeah.
I don't know how fast it was for you, but
I thought it was relatively quick for what we had.
Okay. Yeah. I remember walking in, my parents were there. I remember what I was wearing. And I remember that the second that they said guilty, I like let out this like wail, like this like just relief, like cry. And I remember you turning around to look at me, like you made eye contact, like wondering if I was okay. And I'm like, sorry, I'm like not trying to like, I remember like trying to then like be quiet because I didn't know if it was like a be quiet or if it was like, are you okay? Like I didn't know what the look was. So I didn't
want you getting tossed out of the courtroom too.
Right. Exactly. And so I remember that. And then like guilty on both accounts. Okay, court's over. Then you came back and we hugged. And that was a clip that
I think that's the one that the news played. And there was like something about the side of your face that they could see. And that was the one where I was like, get it down.
Yeah. And my mom's face was in the background too. So like, my parents are so well known down here. Like it was a mess, but it was also great. So with everything that has been said, I want to talk to anybody listening who might be a victim of this. Like all three of us can relate to you from one aspect or another. But I want to say, I am so sorry that this happened to you. This was not your fault. I don't care what you were wearing. I was wearing nothing. I was getting a massage. Like, I don't care what you were wearing. It was not your fault. There's nothing that you did to deserve this. There's nothing that you did to make whoever it was think that it was okay to do this. This is not your fault. So I want to get that right out in the open. And I really want just to talk a little bit to the shame and guilt, shame and guilt on my side. Like, you grew up in a Christian church, like don't have sex and all these things. And then it's like, well, I didn't really have a choice. Like, so there's so many things that, you know, happen that we don't have full control over. Whether you said no, whether you were quiet, whether you were physically pushing him off of you. I did all three. And it wasn't your fault. And I'm so sorry that this happened to you. But if you are living in the shame and the guilt and the questioning and the, did this really happen? Like, did I do anything to cause this? Like, you didn't. No. I don't even know what the statute of limitations is, but you need to talk about it. You need to go to the police. You need to get therapy. You need to tell a trusted friend. Like, you have to start talking about this, because living in denial is not helpful. It's only postponing the healing. And Katie said at the beginning of this, like, wow, I'm surprised at how healthy you're doing, because I dealt with it. Like, and that's not putting me on a pedestal. Like, from watching Law and Order SVU, I saw, even if it was dramatically, how much it affected the victims and how empowered the victims felt when they were talking about it. And the amount of people that I have now met that this has happened to, even specifically at Massage Envy or in other situations, like, I'm really sorry to say that this is a very common thing, but that is a big testament to you are not alone. Like, there are, unfortunately, a lot of people who hear you and understand you and can identify with what you are going through.
I think what I would say to add to that, and almost come from a different perspective of someone who was impacted as the then wife of someone now who has allegedly raped women. I think about the lists of people that he read off to me. And I think about how if someone would have come forward, it could have stopped the next person.
Right.
And I'm not saying that all those lists were all complete 100. There's different levels, right? But if someone has raped you, ask someone to go with you and turn them in. And also, I struggled with the question for a long time, why did nobody tell me? Why did none of these women tell me? And it was because they thought that I was in an open relationship. And whatever you're being told, I wish someone would have reached out to me. But I got over that real quick, because I also, instead of being like, oh, why God, why for so long? I had that thought for a while. I felt the Lord say, Gina, by my grace, I did not let it go on any longer. And from a judgment standpoint, that I believe is all, God is the ultimate judge. He did not let it go on any longer for my ex-husband, if that makes sense, or for someone who could have been his next victim. So that's kind of like my perspective, just to encourage women to speak up and speak out and ask someone that they trust to help them do that if they need the help. And what you said.
I think there's this negative connotation with being a victim, right? Like, oh, that's victim mentality, or but there's a very big difference between victim mentality and actually being a victim and having something that has happened to you.
So you were victimized. You are no longer wearing the identity of victim. You were wounded.
Right.
You were victimized. You are no longer living as a victim. You are no longer owning and taking on the wound. Right? And this is the importance, you guys, of processing through trauma. So let therapist Gina come out for a second. If we don't process through that trauma, it remains in the body. I don't know if you've heard the phrase before, but your body keeps the score. So if your body has been wronged, violated by somebody, it's trapped in there somewhere. So this victim mentality might be coming out in different ways. It might be coming out sideways, but when you can process through that, when you can allow that to exit out emotionally, even physically, out of your body, you become someone who was once victimized. You are no longer a prisoner to this victim that is locked within you. Does that make sense? You were wounded. You can integrate it into your full story. Danielle can speak about this. And this is why Katie's saying, like, wow, I'm surprised you're so healthy, because she has found a way to integrate it.
I'm not surprised. I'm happy to find out.
No, sorry. Correct my language.
I'm not that patronizing.
No, but Katie, probably what you're saying is that it maybe that Danielle is more of a rarity, that oftentimes that victims are still living in that. You know what I'm saying? So my encouragement also, just from a therapeutic standpoint, is to work it through. Get with a therapist. Maybe you don't tell everybody like we're telling everybody, but
putting out for the world.
We feel called to it because we feel called, like this is now like a story that God has given us, and the power is in not keeping it within. The power is in encouraging and empowering other people and coming against culture. So.
And as a therapist, sorry.
No, go.
As a therapist for you and me as a prosecutor, we generally don't meet people like having the best day of their lives. Even now, as a criminal defense attorney, I meet people who are like trauma city limits. And the just for anybody else who's listening to this who may have gone through it, it's okay to not be okay. The worst, I mean, it was probably the worst thing for me to hear, but it was probably a good thing that she verbalized it. And this was not Danielle. This was another victim of mine. And I'll cry when I say it. In my office, she told me, I can't believe he didn't have the decency to kill me. And she's, she made it through that. She's okay now. And it took her a while, and she got back into horseback riding. And then by the time we sentenced the guy, her whole top half of her body was in a cast because she decided she was going to go through an entire jump. And she was just like, yeah, nailed it. And she was fine. Well, not fine, but she had worked through it by then. But right afterward, I mean, she was very much not fine. And it was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my office. And we were talking about maybe Baker acting her on the spot and, stuff like that. And that is a normal reaction to something like this. So just don't make rash decisions when you're in that kind of an emotional place.
Okay, so keep going. So from the professional side of this, you're dealing with the detectives, you're dealing with other attorneys, you you were a big part of making me feel safe and comfortable and all of these things. So if someone is wanting to come forward, but they have these like, well, I'm not going to be received well, they're not going to believe me, like all of these things, like talk me through like what even that looks like from the professional side.
Well, I mean, we will not ask you to go forward on a case that we think we can't prove.
Okay.
So just kind of understand that you can report something and then somebody who's in front of you might, and it is, you know, it's so terrible to say it like this, but if I'm not saying you weren't victimized, but if I think this has a potential of really not being successful in court, I'm not going to drag you through that whole thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I mean, when we filed on your case, Danielle, we looked at it and we're like, oh, we have it. You know, I don't know if a jury's going to eat a big bowl of crazy and acquit the guy, but I can go forward on this knowing that I didn't put her through this for fun. So if you talk to somebody, and most states, and I'll talk about Florida initially, Florida has the Victim's Bill of Rights. You can submit a rape kit as a Jane Doe and just make sure that the evidence is saved. You can make a statement and the cops will put you in all the reports as a Jane Doe. And they'll, you know, obviously somewhere in the computer system, they'll link you up and say, okay, this is this person so that they can call you. But you can submit a rape kit as a Jane Doe. You can report as a Jane Doe. And then 6 months later, you know, once you've got your big girl pants on, you can move forward if you want.
Right.
A lot of times though, if they think that somebody is inherently dangerous, we will push you to go because I had one guy that was, you know, very much into little girls and we weren't going to let him keep working at that daycare. I'm sorry, Mom. I know you're Mom. I'm so sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
But like, you know, it's a balancing act that I'm not going to force you to go forward with something that you don't want to do. But in other aspects, if I know he's done it before, you better bet that I'm going to be in your ear 24 hours a day. And even as a criminal defense attorney, I get on some of these cases and I'm like, wow, this poor, you know, I feel like the prosecutor really hasn't had like a come to Jesus talk with this victim. And it's not my position to do that, obviously. But I like there should be some kind of a discussion where like, you know, we can go forward on this, but you need to prepare yourself for how this is going forward. And, you know, that was something that was taught in my old office, that you have like a come to Jesus talks. Like, I can't tell you this jury isn't going to eat a big bowl of crazy and, you know, just check not guilty and go home. And then we don't get another bite at the apple. So you need to be ready for a knock. Even if you've got the whole thing on tape and a full confession and DNA and, you know, 30 nuns with 20/20 vision that are all eyewitnesses. You need to be prepared for the fact that this might not end well. Right. And luckily you had a happy ending.
You still did your job. There's still a police report. Like there's still, so that if it happens again, he's pulled up in the system. Like, just because it might not turn out in your favor, you have to report it. And I also want to say, even though in my case, I didn't know the guy, it can still be rape if you're in a relationship. Like your husband could be raping you. Like we heard a story the other day that, you know, there was definitely sexual abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse. And he literally said, no, like we're going to put lube on you and you're going to do this. And even though he was her husband, that is rape. So I want to be clear, if it's a boyfriend, I don't care the relationship, whether it's a spouse, whether it's a stranger, that does not make a difference. If it is not consensual, it's rape. So I want to give you the strength to know that. What?
Also think about it. Like if you want to commit a sexual assault, what do you need? You need access, proximity, privacy. I mean, you got all those things in a massage room, obviously, in your case. But I mean, in a relationship, that's ideal. I mean, it's okay. Just assume I don't mean it the way it's going to sound out. It's an ideal situation. You're home alone in the dark, you know, in a house where nobody else is going to hear you scream. I mean, if you were going to do it, that's where you're going to do it.
Yeah. Right. Right.
And if monsters look like monsters, you'd be able to avoid them.
Yeah.
Wow. That just hit me. If I can speak to this for a second, when I was in my early discovery phase of everything that I kind of walked through, this idea of like the toxicity of my thought was that, oh, well, he's just sick. Like he'll change. We have to get him in the right scenario. He'll change. There's forgiveness. I'll forgive him 70 times 7, like Jesus tells me to.
Yeah.
And like, oh, but your job as a wife is just to forgive him. Your job as a wife is this. And those are all things that were learned sort of patterns, behaviors, not necessarily wrong, but I needed to dig deeper and I needed to be challenged. And I'm glad that I did the extra detective work. I'm glad that I sought out the help of his therapist, that I sought out the help that I did of friends who know me, who knew him. And so just to realize like, those thoughts, like I was not able to objectively look and I needed people to help me objectively look. And I can 100% say today that I have forgiven him.
Yeah.
100% that I want the best for him because I want him to heal.
Yeah.
And there was a conviction that came when I went to God with my whoosh, with all my stuff. And I felt and I knew from God that Gina, with you and your forgiveness, and ultimately another word that a therapist might put with that is enabling, he won't heal.
Right.
This will continue. And so I think for him, a part of our divorce, and that was his a little bit more towards rock bottom. Not sure that we're there yet. So I just wanted to say that from another perspective, and that toxicity that interlaced my mind early on.
Well, and that's a really, really valid point. Forgiveness does not have to mean reconciliation. You can forgive and you can not have this bitterness and this offense towards this person, but that doesn't mean that they're getting married again. Like that doesn't mean that I have to have this person in my life. Like when God says to forgive, that does not mean, like that is for your own sanity. That is for your own heart, so that a root of bitterness doesn't grow and you don't become this victim mentality. You don't become this angry person. But forgiveness is for you. It is not for him. And so when you forgive, that does not mean that, okay, we can be best friends now. Like that doesn't mean that they even have to be in your life. Like that is a very big misconception when it comes to forgiveness. Forgiveness does not always equal reconciliation. For my friends who are listening who have somebody in their life that they know this has happened to, they have no idea how to support, how to deal. Like if you have a loved one that has gone through this, just let them know that you're there for them. You're there if they want to talk. And an answer can be, you know, I don't know the answer to that. I don't know. I don't know why this happened to you. I don't know, but I'm here for you and I'm here to listen. And I'm not always going to have the right answers, but I want you to know that my heart is so grieved with you. Like I'm going to mourn with those who mourn. Like I'm hurting at your pain. Like sometimes sitting there in silence with the person means more than you can ever know. Like you don't have to have the right answers. Obviously, it might be an uncomfortable situation because it hasn't happened to you. You don't really know how to identify. It's obviously an awkward situation because that's a really, really tough thing to deal with. But sometimes just sitting there in silence together is like they just want company and to feel safe and to not feel alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that I want to say is don't blame yourself for not being there or for not doing more for loved ones. Like I know when I told my ex-husband like that it had happened, like of course a man, a protector, all these things, like he was furious that he couldn't be, like that he wasn't there, like that I wasn't there to protect you and all these things. And even if you were there and you walked away, or even whatever it is not your fault. If you are carrying guilt because of someone else's pain, like that is not your fault either. You might need to go through some healing and some therapy, but you can't live in the past. Nothing healthy or beneficial is coming from that. And maybe you can speak as a therapist to that, or maybe you can speak to how you've seen victims and their families walk through it. But I want you to know, like, none of this is your fault. And there's nothing that you could have done.
Yeah. And when I was saying earlier that, you know, report it and you don't need to proceed forward with the prosecution, it sometimes it's just documenting it.
Yes.
And you can decide later. And you don't need to decide today. You can report as a Jane Doe, decide later. You can report it and find out, oh my God, he's got 5 other reports before me. Hell yes, I'm going forward.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, more information is better. That's all I can say about that. And hopefully you have somebody who's a prosecutor or a cop or somebody like that who's going to talk to you about, the likelihood of success in a case like this. And if, it's not high enough for you, at least you documented it. You can also file for an injunction too.
Yeah.
A civil injunction.
So for those of us who don't know, what is an injunction?
Oh, so it's basically like a sexual or domestic violence thing. Keep somebody away from me, stalking, cyber stalking, harassment. You need to have more than one instance of it. But if you're not ready to prosecute somebody, the great thing about injunctions, now, of course, I'm in the South, so this is also the terrible thing about injunctions here, is that they're not allowed to have guns anymore. So if you feel like you're at risk for violence, that's a really great thing to have the cops go to their house, serve them with a piece of paper, say you're going to a final hearing in front of a judge and we're taking your guns. And in the South, as I told you previously, it's like, no, take my kids, not my guns. So people tend to fight it up here a lot more, like in the more rural areas, because there's a lot more hunting and stuff like that. But filing for an injunction, that's putting stuff on paper too, so that there's some documentation for the future in case something weird happens next week.
Yeah, exactly. That's so good. So I know that this has obviously been a really heavy episode, but I want to add, like, Katie, especially when, like you said, your first 2 weeks were extremely hard when you were, especially in the sex crime unit, like, or in that, branch of law, like, how did you stay hopeful, like, in the midst of all of that darkness? Like, how did you keep your sanity? How did you not, like, delve into this deep depression of all the darkness that's in the world? Like, how did you stay hopeful in the midst of all of it?
I've always been like a very type A person. So I played sports and all those things. One thing, they actually started delving into your background. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about that was that I knew exactly where you'd been to college, because I'd been to college and I went to William and Mary, you went to Liberty. And I was like, oh, I know what they wanted, your Facebook profile. And I was like, oh, I know exactly what's going to be on this Facebook profile. And I was like, yes, you can have it. Cause it's all like,
as long as every
biblical verses. Yeah. If you'll agree that it's admissible, sure. And it's all like Bible verses being posted. And I'm like,
slam dunk.
Yeah. So, but I've had cases where, I saw a lot of God in that unit, and not in a, as you know, I'm Catholic. So my God, I joke around, but my God will smite you like lightning bolts. Our God is not as friendly as the Protestant God. It's a lot. And I'm joking around. Obviously it's the same God, but there's, there's confession in Catholic Church, like go directly to hell, do not pass go, do not collect $200. One of my friends was pregnant and heavily pregnant in the unit. And I went out to go hunting for one of her victims who was homeless. And we knew that this guy had raped at least, I say at least because we knew of 4 other homeless women.
Right.
And I decided that I was going to go out hunting for her because my friend was about 8 months pregnant, at least, it was before I tore my Achilles. It was like, at least I can run. And she, she's legally a planet at this point. So the first person I talked to, I said, here's her picture. I just need some help. I don't care what else is happening here. I'm a prosecutor. I'm not a cop. I just need to find her. There's a guy that's out here and he's victimizing women. And every single person at this homeless camp helped me.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
That gives me
goosebumps. It was like a real, now granted, the investigations unit in my old office, like put me in timeout. They were very upset with me. You don't do this. You did this at night. Do you understand how many pieces you could have been chopped up into? Obviously it worked out. I'm still talking to you, but they weren't happy about it. But that was one of the days that I really saw you know, you see a lot of really terrible things, but you see a lot of very, very good things. And every single person helped. I had one investigator tell me about having to go into like basically a den of one of the Latin kings and saying, like, knowing that marijuana was hanging in the air and stuff like that, and just saying, I just need your help to find this kid.
Right.
This kid's mom is hiding her from us because she accused her father. I just need to help you. I just need your help for this kid. I don't care what else is happening here. And every single person in the room carefully looked at the picture, and 3 of them knew where she was.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean,
So
like, there's honor among thieves. There's, you know, that was still like one of the greatest days when I was driving away from there and I had her contact information. I charged up her cell phone in my car so that we could get in contact with her on Monday. And, you know, it was just, he brought me right to her.
Wow.
So, you know, the good in people, you still see that. And I have jurors that, you know, on one case that was a mistrial, begged me, you have to prosecute him again. You have to prosecute. Yeah. Please promise me, this is my cell number. Tell me what's going to happen. And the 5 jurors that were like adamant that he be guilty, I texted them when he finally took a plea, and they were all relieved, and they had all kept in contact because they were so upset that there was that one holdout.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, you know, I mean, you meet a lot of good people out there too.
Yeah.
So it's faith in humanity kind of situation.
Yeah. It's, I'm sure that's a roller coaster. It's like drowning one day, then like sky high another day. Like that's a lot.
Yeah. Now I live a very boring life.
You need to. Hey?
I know.
Yeah.
Keep it calm. Yeah.
You've done a lot, but
So
man,
good.
especially how you said, I saw a lot of God when I prosecuted those crimes. Like, light will always defeat the darkness. And even if that's only eternally, but I want for anybody listening, like, God's heart for you is not for you to be suffering in this. God's heart for you is not that it happened. God did not make or even allow this to happen to you. Like, this is a fallen and sinful world. Like, I beg you, if you are angry at God, if you are blaming God for this, like, he is just as brokenhearted about the situation as you are. Like, so even if your first step is just running to him and being honest with yourself about how you're feeling, and he cares, he knows, but he so badly wants a relationship with you that's a major step of you literally just telling him, God, I'm pissed.
Yeah.
Like, I'm really hurt. Like, he can handle it.
Yeah.
He's not afraid of those conversations. So even if your first step is just taking your pain and your feelings to God, like, he will give you the strength to move forward, and he will help you heal, and he is your hope. And I mean, that's the only reason I am where I am. I think I said at one point, I don't know how people get through this if they're not a Christian, if they don't believe in God. I genuinely don't. I don't know, because I know that he's the only thing that got me through. So what an episode. Do you have any closing?
I think thoughts? I can't top that.
Katie, do you have anything last you want to add?
No, just stay safe out there.
Yes.
or my standard, if everyone's smoking crack and there's a samurai sword on the wall as decorations, what do? You leave.
Leave it immediately. I love it. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. If our guests want to follow you, where can they do that?
I have a Twitter handle. It's at Katie Esquire, which is pretty easy to remember. I'm also on Facebook. It's my full name. My first name is Kathleen. My last name is Bogenschutz. Just search for me.
Yeah, girl. But hey, thank you so much for your input. Thanks for walking this journey of life with me, especially in that time. But you are a good one, and I'm honored to know you and have you in my life.
Oh, well, I'm so happy that people think of me years later, because I often do think of all of you.
I'm sure.
Beautiful.
And that's how we know you're a good one.
Yeah.
But guys, thanks so much for joining us today, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for listening. You can find us on all social platforms at The Unwed Bride. And for exclusive content, head on over to the Patreon link in the description. See you next time.